Succession planning. Tips for success.
I'm Jennifer Harrington. I'm currently an attorney who practices at a law firm up in Algona, Iowa, the Buchanan, Bibler, Gabor, and Mice law firm.
Best practices.
I think the number one thing is probably the hardest thing, which is keep organized, right? You're going to need to organize yourself. And specifically, from as an attorney, what I want to know is how's it titled, right? Like, who owns it? Is it the trust that owns it? Is it the entity that owns it? Do you own it with somebody else, right? Are you and your brother owning it? That's important to me. And then two, how are we putting it on the tax sheet, right? So what's your understanding of ownership? And then also how's it actually being put down on the tax records? I think that helps keep track of things and also make sure that whatever your succession plan is, that both your estate plan and if you have any entity, that those organizational documents, that those actually match what's going on, right? That you're actually putting into action the plan that's in your head, and it's going to be as seamless as we want it to be. So that being organized allows us to kind of do that audit to make sure that your plan's going to happen. And unfortunately, there's no magic box for attorneys or tax preparers that say, oh, I'm going to put in your name and your birthday and your social security number, and I'll know all of the assets that you're kind of associated with. I would love if that database ever actually happens. I have privacy concerns if it does, but it does not exist now. And so that's all you really need to know. So you need to keep organized. I think number two, and this one is just like a harder one to swallow, is that you do need to be realistic about the future, and primarily about the need for liquidity for the next generation. And where is that going to come from, and how is it going to be brought to the table? And are they realistic about being able to swallow 6, 7, 8% interest rates for whatever plan you have, right? If the plan involves buying somebody out, there's likely a higher interest rate associated with that, at least in the foreseeable future. And we'll see if we ever get down to the days of, 1, 2% credit again. It'd be great. I would love it. But that's not in the foreseeable future. And then I think because of that, then you really need to think about the family dynamics at play. Especially when the second parent dies, if the parents weren't divorced, and even if they were divorced, I would say when a parental figure dies, old sibling dynamics come back, even when just one parent dies, and then especially I think when the second parent dies, if there are siblings, sibling dynamics come back, usually in some kind of weird ways, and that's cool. That's what grieving is. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think we need to plan with that in mind, and to know that those first couple years after somebody passes away, or they have very advanced Alzheimer's, are years of grief, and they're years where decisions are hard, and they're years where it would be nice if there was somebody who gave you a book or a plan that said, make this decision now. Because dealing with the emotional side of not having that person in your life is a lot to deal with. And your attorney is not equipped to handle that very well. We're just not. We're good at handling the plan, right? We're good at following that plan that somebody made. We're good at making sure, that the next steps are followed from a financial point of view, that the tax return gets filed. But we're, we have a box of tissues in the office. That's about it. And so I think, being realistic about that and understanding the need for liquidity for the younger generation if you're going to have a buyout, you need to be realistic about that, and there's going to be some hard decisions there probably as you go about the planning process. But making that hard decision now is going to allow that next generation to be in a better financial position so that they can actually grow and expand and create the legacy that you envision, right? Instead of, and maybe that's presupposing that's your legacy that you envision. Even if you don't have a farm, I think a lot of people envision that their land will continue to be farmed. And so if that's something that's important to you, those are things that you can put into place. But keep in mind that, if you're going to want somebody to come to the market with fair market value for your heirs, in this situation, you're going to get the people who can pay top dollar, and that's somebody who's already established, and that's okay. But that's what'll happen. And then I think this is the big rain cloud nobody wants to talk about, but you do need to have a plan in place for if you need to be in the nursing home for 18 months. And you need to decide, what realistically would happen and what are we going to do to fund that. And know that if you are in the nursing home, that is about $7,000 a month. And that I would say that's kind of like middle range price in the state from what I hear. Upper end is probably about 10 grand right around now. Lower is about 6. That doesn't mean that lower goes down to 4. I really have not heard of much that are cheaper than 6 grand a month. So that's something to you need to keep that in mind. And then last but not least, you want a team of people that you find approachable and that you think can teach you stuff, right? There are things that you're going to need to know in succession planning, and you want somebody who can teach you. You're going to want to know how things are going to need to be titled. So you want somebody who you enjoy listening to so that you remember to title them correctly, right? And same kind of goes for your CPA. When we talk about a time of transition, there are probably things that are going to have to look a certain way, right? That are going to have to be set up a certain way. And so you're going to want to be able to talk to these people and understand what they're telling you. Or at least feel comfortable enough to say, hey, I don't really know what that means. Can you kind of walk me through, or why is this in here? And so I think finding somebody you feel comfortable saying that to is step one. And then you can kind of build your team from there. The other person that may or may not be involved is your insurance agent. And that's it kind of depends on what your plan really is, and how you're set up. But sometimes, we are talking to the insurance agents. I mean, even just, again, that long-term care kind of thing, like if we're using that as kind of a funding source at all, we'll probably just make sure that my client's understanding of that financial asset can actually be used the way that they want it to be used. So we'll rope them in.
Impact on Next Gen.
Yeah, I get this question a lot, or I would say I get asked a lot about what can the younger generation do to kind of make sure there's a plan, or not be too nosy. And I get that, right? I'm a Midwestern girl myself. I'm from Wisconsin originally. And so I know that kind of approaching somebody and being like, hey, have you planned for your death? Is not what we do in our families. And so I think, there are ways to approach this conversation that are productive and unproductive. And your family more than anybody else. That said, I think a great way is to actually get your house in order, right? So you need to do a little succession planning yourself, right? So if you were to pass away unexpectedly, right, because that's the unfortunate, most likely situation, what would happen and what planning needs to get done? At the very least, I would say people need to have their powers of attorney done, right? And a power of an attorney form is a form where you designate an agent who can act on your behalf in certain situations. Most people have a financial power of attorney, which says, hey, this person is able to conduct business on my behalf. And then you can also have what's called a healthcare power of attorney, where it's like, hey, this person can make healthcare decisions when I'm unable to make healthcare decisions. And so I would say those are the first two forms that anybody over the age of 18 should have. And so first things foremost, like go and do that kind of planning and say, hey, older generation, just so you know, I've done this. If anything were to happen to me, I put the documents here, and these are the persons I've listed. If a farm accident were to happen, where are your documents, right? That's a great way of just approaching it, saying, hey, I've done it. I've thought emergencies happen. What's the plan, right? And that way it's not, hey, where am I in your will, right? So I do think, there's a way to approach those situations. The other way that I find that tends to be very compelling to people and can kind of get them motivated to maybe come into the attorney's office and kind of see what their plan is or what the consequence is to kind of come up with your own balance sheet and kind of say like, hey, this is where I am right now. This is where I want to be, right, in 10 years. What can I expect from you, right? Or not. And I know that's like very blunt. It depends what your family is there, but there's a way to approach that question that says, in this plan to get me from here to there, what support can I count on? Or what help would you like to give? And however you need to phrase that for your family. But I think that also is a good motivator that, again, kind of gets them thinking in the mind of where do I want to be? Because realistically, they've done various studies and people stop investing in their operation as they start approaching the retirement ages. Or I'd say as their buddies who have off-farm jobs are approaching those retirement ages. They start looking around, and they stop maybe investing so much into the operation, into expansion as much because, again, their cash needs are different. And so, if your plan is hopefully to expand or even to kind of keep the status quo going as far as cash into the operation, that's maybe something we need to double check with older generation. And so that's something where if you come with your financials and you come with an open book, I think sometimes they're a little bit easier to approach in that. And then last but not least, the older generation has probably already heard the scary stories. And I know that's like really hard to hear because I think sometimes, and especially as an attorney, sometimes I'm like, oh my goodness, that would be the most motivating thing if you just heard about this crazy estate that I just dealt with. But I have not found that to be successful. So, you can kind of, feel free to like kind of share the town gossip as you know it. But just keep in mind that, probably constantly reminding them that not having a plan in place is doom and gloom, or, probably leaves you at a disadvantage, isn't making it more likely that they actually come to visit their professionals. I haven't found that to be a motivating factor to actually get them into my office. Instead, a lot of it kind of comes from like, well, wow, they're being proactive. I kind of thought maybe I should be proactive too. And so that's kind of my advice for younger generations. And the other one is, plan for the worst case scenario. Plan for something happens and honestly, either the nursing home eats up the whole asset or, there is a big fight and ultimately it all goes to attorney's fees. Something of that nature, so at some point, you do kind of need that unfortunate, like plan B, I might have to do this, or, could you buy out a sibling? Or could, if you're in that situation where it's likely that, your parents might do a share and share alike or split equally, what liquidity problems is that going to give to you? And realistically, what would you need to make that easier? So that if your parents, and if you kind of have some of that, like, oh, well, this is actually what I would need to be able to buy out a sibling, then you're at least prepared for when for when that conversation might arise. Because that is that is what happens a lot, is kind of a right of first refusal or a purchase option. And so knowing that those are kind of very common things in the estate planning world, if I was the younger generation, I would say, okay, in the ideal world, this is how I would want it written. So that if a family planning meeting ever happens, if that's not something you guys are already doing, then at least, you've kind of had your ducks in a row of kind of like what would be the ideal situation if mom and dad asked.